Very well. I'll call this special regional council meeting to order. Please be advised that today's meeting is available for the public to attend virtually and is being streamed and recorded. Can I get a motion, please, to adopt the agenda? Moved by Councillor Penny, seconded by Councillor Andrews. All those in favor? Carried. You can check yourself before you record it enough. Very well. Today we have with us our Member of Parliament, Mr. Bob Zimmer, Member of Parliament for Peace River North, Northern Rockies. Bob, how have you been?
Okay, there we go. Yeah, I am used to these things. I was just going to say I'm not going to be as efficient as you. Just like you must have gone through that in about 5 seconds getting us into the meeting. I'm not that good. Things are going pretty good though. In some respects, the country's in a tough spot. The last budget's a concern. I think the biggest thing that I'll bring to you is there's a lot of money getting spent, but in terms of infrastructure, we usually like to bring good news to municipalities, like this is what we have, and sort of this is the pools to, make requests from. A whole bunch of money going out the door, but I haven't seen much infrastructure actually. I've asked this across the riding, and there's certain, there was an allocation to the Fort Nelson First Nations for geothermal, which is a good investment. There's other sort of little good news stories like that in the riding, but we're not seeing bridges getting built to the scale we should be, or this is the time that we should be spending money on infrastructure when things are on a bit of a decline. I'm just not seeing that. As for Fort Nelson, I've been watching sort of what's, how you've been doing, and peak renewables, we see, I think that's a positive. I've seen some of your comments, Mayor. I think predominantly positive in the community, although there's some concerns about it. Sending these raw logs to the chipper to get put into pellets, but from my conversations with Peak Renewables, this is a starting point, and they want to go from here to possibly producing other lumber and different things. So positive in that direction. So you got to start somewhere. Myself, I guess we've been going back and forth to Ottawa a little bit less than we normally do. So we go back every about 3 weeks or so. Very sort of COVID type house though. There's the government side, there's usually about 1 or 2 across the way. Everybody else is virtual. On our side, we like to populate the house quite a bit with, of course, I was just in Ottawa last week, talking about certain issues. One thing that I will mention, though, that we're just getting done is we're just finishing up a forestry recovery strategy study in Natural Resource Committee. I've asked the minister about a softwood lumber agreement multiple times. Other things around the forest sector. Lumber prices should say that we're in a good place, and we've seen some mills reopen that were shuttered before. But, I mean, lumber prices are just through the roof, as you know. On a sheet of standard sheeting, that's not even the fancy plywood. That's the stuff you normally get for $20 or $25. I remember building houses back in the day. Is now $92, and a 4x16 is now $15. So it's slowed housing starts, as I'm sure. I don't know. Housing starts is probably not a problem up here because of your inventory, but it's affecting having some negative consequences. But I'm happy that in some sectors, or in some areas of the forest sector, they're doing fairly well, and that's good to see. It's been a while coming. What else? So I've been working a lot on natural resources, as I've said, working a lot on, I'm still co-chair of the Parliamentary Outdoor Caucus, so working on things like caribou closures. Not that I want them to happen, but working on, going to close, they better close it for the right reason, and working similarly with the public fishery in BC. So I've been doing lots of work on salmon. I just was on a Pacific salmon call just before, as I was walking in the doors here, a Zoom call. And you might have not been following this, but there's been, the minister just announced they're closing the public fishery entirely again to salmon. even though there's a lot of, we call them, selective, like hatchery fish, there's a lot of salmon out there, and they still have closed the entire fishery down. So that affects families, somebody, up here you might have a logging truck and a little business that feeds 10 people with mechanics. Well, down there, they might have a boat that feeds 10 families and not one boat, whether it's tackle and the rest. So it's affected thousands of BC families. So we're trying to get a good came out and close it again. So anyway, I'd rather, as I've said many times, open it up for questions of me. I'm sure you have more specific things to ask me than just be around, because politicians can do that from time to time.
Well,
it's good stuff, but
it's always good to hear your thoughts, Bob, on everything. And I would start off by saying that we are very fortunate. We had been applying for a grant to have the airport paved this year, and the federal government has come along and they have agreed this year to pave it, and it's a $17 million contract. Finally. Nice. And that's great. It puts much needed revenue into our municipality, and that, along with other grants that we received, we will actually be spending more money. The municipality will be spending more money from grants this year than actually from taxation. And I don't know if any other municipality in the province of British Columbia has ever done something like that, but we will be spending a fair amount of money on infrastructure, as you mentioned. So I know this is a one-off thing, and there may be problems with infrastructure across the country, like you say. Some of the major cities, I think, have an infrastructure deficit that's really not being addressed, and that's something that we would hope that the government would eventually get to as they move to this reopening program. Peak Renewables, I spoke to them yesterday. They are moving along. They're waiting now for Minister of Forest to make her ruling on the transfer of Canfor's timber license to them. And we look forward to having a positive result of that. And we're expecting it here maybe late this week, early next week. But the minister will take her time and look at all aspects of this before she makes her ruling. But we're fairly confident that that's going to happen. And as you said, Peak Renewables, once they're here, I've had a steady stream of people through my office looking at doing value added in the forest business. The important thing is that we get Peak Renewables here to be that anchor, and many companies have come here looking to operate in the forest sector once Peak Renewables has been established. So that's great. As far as the Softwood lumber agreement, I note that some of the people south of the border are complaining about the high cost of lumber in the United States. And this may be an opportunity for the government in Ottawa to do something about the Softwood lumber agreement. I've heard numbers like $50,000 being added to the price of a house in the United States. So the consumer groups are starting to scream, about the high cost of lumber. So hopefully this will be an opportunity to renegotiate that and maybe put softwood lumber to bed once and for all.
Can I just speak to that?
Sure, go ahead.
Mayor? So we were holding Minister Ng to account. I asked her specific questions. First of all, we asked the bureaucracy. The ministry was there, and I said, well, where are you at with negotiations on a softwood lumber agreement? Biden administration just in, and they said they couldn't answer the question. So we had Minister Ng come in, and she said sort of said that they were talking about it, and I tried to drill down about it, and it didn't sound like they were really talking about it at all. She was trying to allude to it, but not give me. And then we just saw this on Monday, and this is, just get the name right. He is the trade negotiator for the U.S. on this, and I'm just, again, going to get her name. I believe it's Catherine Tai. That's Catherine Tai. This is her quote. This is from a Reuters article on Monday. But Tai told U.S. senators that despite higher prices, the fundamental dispute remains, and there have been no talks on a new lumber quota arrangement. In order to have an agreement and in order to have a negotiation, you need to have a partner, and thus far the Canadians have not expressed interest in engaging. So all the talk that they were supposedly having this conversation is frankly baloney. Again, this is why we're asking her specific questions. Is, you know, ultimately, it's not something to just call somebody out for this. Ultimately, we want it done. And when we were in, we had trade agreements extended, and that we just got it done. So we're just hoping that, you know, they actually do get to the table and get this thing. At least start the conversation. I mean, it's that they're not even talking about it yet.
Well, I know from talking to several people within the provincial government, Deputy Minister Allen, for one, you know, this was an important thing for the province of British Columbia. So I think that article would be a good thing to pass that on to the Ministry of Forest of British Columbia, because they are very interested in making sure that the softwood lumber gets resolved. And I think everybody else is, and it's been a burr in everybody's side here for the past 30 years, as long as I can remember anyway. Caribou Recovery, you were mentioning. One of the things that I've noticed about the Caribou Recovery, and people who come and talk to us about this, the science is not as robust as we'd like. The collaring and the following of the caribou to find out exactly what the issue is doesn't seem to be there. A lot of the time they talk about habitat. Destruction of habitat is causing all kinds of problems. Well, as you know, Mr. Zimmer, we've been a long time, we haven't had any forestry in our area. Our habitat has regenerated, but yet still we seem to be listening to these people talking about roads and cut lines and everything. Most of these cut lines and so on have been regrown. So if habitat was the issue, would you not expect to see a rebound in our area? They don't seem to have a very good answer for that. And I'm not a biologist, but I would like to see more scientific study and more actual facts rather than having biologists tell me what they think the problem is. Collaring of wolves, collaring of caribou, and tracking that. So, I mean, evidence is, I think, is the most important thing.
Can I speak to that?
Sure,
Gary,
go ahead.
Or Mayor. So what just happened, I believe it was last week, is that there's some citizens in Dawson Creek that concerned recovery. They've been at the table negotiating closures around snowmobiling areas and places like that. You know, places that people recreate, right? So they just got word that after all these negotiations, that regardless of all what they asked for was basically thrown out the door. And it depends on the area. I'm not sure. I didn't look at the maps too closely to see how Fort Nelson and the Northern Rockies are affected. But 80% closures now have come down to hit the fan. So we're going to start responding as we did before a year or so ago, when we had all these things around this, just to bring awareness to it, just so they couldn't kind of. Well, it looks like we need to get back at it, because 80% is a pretty big number, especially when people. That's why we live up here, is that we can get it and go out and back. What I'm setting out more to talk about and discuss is a thing called 30 by 30. And so what that is, a plan it stems from the UN, and it talks about protecting 30% lands and 30% of our oceans by 2030. And so I was on a call in Washington virtually with congressmen and senators and the new Secretary of the Interior. It's like our natural resource minister, but in the U.S. Talking about 30-30 explicitly. And their recreational groups, like their fishers and hunters, have already really done a great job of saying, look, if you're going to protect these areas, you better make sure we're allowed to fish and hunt and do other things. We haven't done that up here as well, and the same agenda has been adopted by the Prime Minister to, the 30 by 30 stuff. And you just Google search it, it's out there. So I think we need to have a conversation about this, because again, 30%, do you think 30% is coming out of anywhere that's urban? Probably not. it's coming out of places where we live, places where we go out and skidoo and four-wheel and fish. And so we need to start saying, okay, if this is going to happen in Canada, we need to have a conversation about it. It's just to close down entire areas for protection. And protection and conservation are two very different terms. Conservation is what we do. You know, a lot of people that I work with go out and remediate streams for salmon, and they go out and work on caribou recovery pens, you know, different things like that. You know, when you protect an area, that means there's no human interactivity at all. You're keeping that completely out of that gated area. Right?
What I worry about with the protection part of it is, you know, if you could be certain that the protection was going to fix the problem, that's fine. But what happens is you don't have a lot of times you don't have the science behind it. Mm-hmm. You're saying protect the area not because you think there's a goal here of increasing the number of caribou or anything. It's because it's a good sound bite for Vancouver, right. Edmonton, Calgary, or wherever, right. Or back east. And it has no basis in science, and it is not going to accomplish the goals that are being touted anyway. So
yeah, I think what works with this is an agreement that, hey, you know, if there's threatened stocks of salmon or caribou or whatever, we're more than happy to support whatever efforts. And there's a lot of effort that's been made around this, as have many First Nations in my riding have done, in a positive way to get these numbers back up. But and that's great. But it's the other places where they're closed, yeah. What's the basis? And the common term that I've heard many times from folks that have done this for years, what? So you're protecting the allegation that a snowmobile trail is going to somehow negatively caribou. They speculate what it might do, but don't have a whole lot of proof that it does. So something to close down, you know, in our backyard, and then they go home to live their lives in Vancouver somewhere or somewhere in Canada. Yet we're stuck with their bad. All that said is that it's going to be it's a bigger topic than just caribou recovery or salmon. It's about this larger protection. We have to have our eyes open. That's all.
Just bring up two other things here. Sure. Salmon recovery. I just anecdotally, you know, my brother lived on Vancouver Island, and there was a fellow there, and he used to buy salmon for $10 a fish. It was illegally caught. The enforcement of the rules and regulations seems to be very much lacking when you speak to people on the street about how much salmon is being caught and where it's ending up. And I think that's a huge problem where, you know, the sports fishery off Vancouver Island puts a huge amount of money into the BC economy. I mean, the amount of money that is spent to catch one salmon is huge. When you start netting salmon and selling them illegally, or you start, going around the edges of the Department of Fisheries, you start to get into problems, and you start to negatively impact that whole industry, and I think that's a big problem. Last thing I'll bring up, because we haven't talked about it yet, is COVID. And as you know, Bob, in your whole riding here, the tourism industry has been hugely impacted by this. The United States is talking now about allowing people to travel if they've had vaccinations. I think it would be a good idea for the government or the opposition to get out in front of this thing and to come up with a policy that gives people an end here to mask mandates driven by the numbers again, or driven by the number of, the vaccination, the level of vaccination, when we can travel, how we can travel. Not a date in the future, but something that is driven more by the numbers of Canadians that are vaccinated and the number of cases. So I personally would like to see from the government some information here to the public to show them where the end of the the end of this COVID thing is. I know people are anxious, and we don't want to see the United States opening up and having us close down, because that's going to make people unhappy. So we would like to have a little bit of visibility, I guess, going forward on COVID.
Yeah,
I think both governments, both the Liberals and the Conservatives, could do a little bit more in getting out their vision for this.
I should have asked for permission. Could I respond
Yep,
to this?
sure, go ahead.
Yeah. I don't want to interrupt you. So it's been we've all seen sort of the Americans. I watched the game hockey. I think we're all a bit jealous about the Americans. And the base, the mask mandate. All of the United States, but I know it was and I think loosely it's been, I would interpret as, the 2-dose fall or something. I forget what it was called, the one-dose summer. Seems to be that once that 2-dose on the plurality is sufficient, up again. I don't think we've heard the official if then, right?
Yeah.
And that's what we're all waiting to hear. I mean, a bigger conversation around COVID is long behind us because of lack of the ability to vaccinate in the first, about our ability to recover. I can ask, though, and send a letter to our minister and ask, what is the definitive, if we get to here, and where's here, when can we sort of cross that line and get back to, I will ask that.
And if not the sitting government, then perhaps the Conservative Party can come out with a statement, regarding what their vision is of it.
Sure.
Taken up enough of your time. I'll throw this open. Are there any questions from any of the councillors? Councillor Penny.
It's not really a question as such, but in speaking with the protection of areas and that sort of thing, when we had our meeting here, would be almost a year and a half ago now, with BC Parks, and they talked about shutting down these areas up in the Summit Lake area, that sort of thing, I asked them why. And they said, well, it doesn't seem like very many people are using it anyway. And I said, well, that doesn't really make any sense, because you're saying it's already protected because it's hardly being used, but you're affecting a few people greatly, because there are some hunters and trappers that use these routes that they had looked to close down to get back to their territories, to get back to their cabins and such like that. So that was their reasoning behind it, that, well, there's not very many people using it, so it's not going to affect that many people if we shut it down.
Crazy.
So it's not much of an effect over the general population, but it greatly affects a very small number of the population.
Well, that to me kind of answers my question a little bit, in that they're going after this arbitrary number. And so right now I think we're at 12 or 14% protected areas, and they're going after 30%. So I think it was at the end of our Caribou conversations, there was about, I forget. It was at the last meeting where we kind of proved them wrong and the reasons why they were doing it, and they basically said, well, we basically have to get to this number. They kind of just let us do it, Again, let's get back to that. Protect from what? So just because it's set by somebody in New York or somebody in Toronto or wherever, the question is why? And protection's a key word. If you're talking about conservation, I think we'd all agree that we need to conserve different things in these. Fine, let's call it conservation, and that's a whole different conversation. When you protect, that means everybody else is out of here. Does that really make a difference anyway? With salmon, we've seen it. Just because you protect areas doesn't mean salmon come back. You have to do other things too. It's part of right. And if you don't do that too, then you can close all the waters you want. The fish aren't going to come back. So.
And to speak to that, what's happened here in BC with the lack of a grizzly bear hunt for how many years now?
Right.
If you want to talk about protection, there was a study that was done in Alaska. I used to be able to spout the numbers off, but they collared some grizzlies with cameras, and they had no idea how many caribou these grizzly bears were actually consuming on their way to the salmon grounds. They thought that these bears were just eating berries and twigs to get themselves to the salmon rivers to gorge, for the summer, but they found out that up to dozens, I don't know the exact numbers anymore, but up to dozens of young caribou were eaten just as travel meals to get to the river. So how much of that is going on in our province right now? And now our grizzly bears have gone from whatever the number was 3 to 4 years ago when the hunt was closed. Numbers that were thrown out to me was, say, 300 bears were killed every year. They were hunted every year. Now, if it's been 4 years, so that's 1,200 bears that haven't been shot, times how many they've made. So I want to talk about conservation and protection of the caribou. We need to get back to that conversation.
Well, and we haven't even talked about wolves too, and that, and they have done some work on, with sort of the overpopulation of wolves, and this crazy idea. So this came up at one of the meetings. Is that well, you know what brings in wolves, right? It's moose. So then, guess how you reduce the amount of wolves in an area? Well, you call them moose. And everybody like, what are you talking about? So you're going to get rid of moose to get rid of wolves. And what is, I've had... Well, it is. And some of the moose populations are threatened too. So here we're going to actually have, and this is real theory. So we've seen these theories before, and somebody thought it up in a classroom somewhere that this is supposed to work. And so I remember hearing this in Prince George. We had a wildlife biologist that was a guide and hunter himself. And he says, that's been tried and it doesn't work. That was a biologist himself. Guess what they're trying again? They're trying a moose cull again. What is old is new again. And but this crazy kind of stuff. And meanwhile, it's a bit of an irrational thing. They're chasing after this thing, but not really sitting down and talking. Our whole point in having these consultations with people like guides and outfitters, talk to people that really know what to do. If you really want to fix something, if I want my car fixed, I'm going to go to a mechanic. Don't talk to somebody in a university somewhere. Talk to somebody that's an expert on it. That's where they don't seem to be listening. They seem to be just pursuing this percentage of all the wisdom in the world. We just need to keep pushing back. That's why pressure works, and we just have to keep up the pressure. Good decision.
Any other questions for Mr. Zimmer? Councillor Gerwing.
Hi, thanks for being here today. So I had two questions. I'll start with childcare or the Liberals' plan for the early learning initiatives that are coming down. I know it's a little different than what the Conservatives have delivered in the past, and so I just want you to know, I'm sure you know this, but we are in desperate need of early learning childcare spots in the community. We have a lot of we have some informal spots, but we don't have that breadth that the workforce requires. And it's been really interesting to note of the probably the last year or so that people are actually talking about child care as an economic driver. And so I guess my question would be the Conservative stance on the Liberals' maybe opportunity to expand early learning childcare spots throughout Canada. Is that going to be a fight you're taking on, or are you going to support that?
So I'll say it this way, because we've opposed the budget, and that's an ask in the budget. But I'd say as a general thing, just about what the most recent offering of the Liberal plan for childcare, or national daycare, that is for certified daycares only, right? So if you're outside the parameter of being uncertified, and it could be, we've always supported it. Okay, I'll finish that thought. We've if you're staying, your kids want to stay with grandma, or you want to, one spouse stays home to take care of the kids. You make that calculation for daycare, okay? The amount I'm going to pay in daycare versus what I'm going to make, I'd rather just stay home with the kids and raise them ourselves. We've always had the approach that that's what we would like to do, and if you would like to use the money to go to a certified daycare, that's up to you. And we'll give you the money, a certain amount of money to put your kids in daycare, but you decide where that money goes.
It doesn't cover the cost
No,
of
that's
the
right.
daycares.
That's
and
right.
it doesn't, improve access for people that don't have those informal networks. From my experience
Yeah,
in this community.
Yeah,
So
and fair
I
enough.
don't want to take a national view of it. I just want to,
yeah,
sort of let you know what does or doesn't work, right? So
yeah.
I'm fully aware of, what the Conservatives tried to do, and I'm not saying that it's a good plan or a bad plan. What
Yeah.
I'm saying is it didn't necessarily increase
Mm-hmm.
child care opportunities in this community.
Right. Well,
So
what we
maybe
heard,
looking at something new would be
Yeah.
of benefit for us.
I'll take it back, and I'll ask if there's any changes to what we're gonna do from what we've done before. And you know, I'm not disputing what you've heard and what you've seen, yourself and experienced. But what we've heard, you know, many times was from families that made that decision, we're gonna stay home with the kids because the calculation made sense for us, instead of having two people out working and paying an exorbitant daycare bill. And it made sense for that one supposed to stay home while the kids were first to 5 or
For sure,
some
if
made
you
that
have
decision
that
based on
option.
that option.
A lot of people don't have that option.
But
Doesn't work for
nevertheless, a lot do, and like that they like the option, as opposed to being sort of funneled into one. You're only in certified daycare only. That's where you're only going to get funding from.
I think I have
Wait.
an answer to my question. May I?
Go ahead.
So the other question that I have is on healthcare.
Mhm.
So I know that healthcare is a provincial, responsibility, but we've had that discussion before. Just wondering if you had the opportunity to bring our case to the work that you do in terms of, not having equitable access to healthcare. And
Yeah.
sort of being left on our own to find solutions.
Yeah, and it's been something that's been ongoing since I started this job, that constant going and access. Now, I can't give you an update recently, on where that's at, because remember what communication we got last? Access to doctors and,
Well, locally, we're, very lucky to have
Yeah.
5 physicians. So, you know, it's not a lack of, GPs in our community.
Mhm.
We're so very lucky to have it.
Mhm.
But it's access to appropriate testing, like ultrasounds, MRIs, CAT scans, like, you know, all of that.
Yeah.
You pretty much have, sorry? Thank you, yeah, thanks for those words, yeah.
Well, maybe, and I'm gonna ask you a question back, because I know, and with 5 doctors, I know that's fluctuated over the years to where you've barely had 1 or 2, and now you're place. How are you at maternal offering that?
Maternity, we have no maternity services.
None at all still?
None at all, no. That's
Even with
12
5
years now?
doctors?
Yeah, 12 years.
I just thought with 5 doctors, you might,
Oh, there's a host of reasons why we can't, and it's a moving bar. They change it as soon as you solve one, then you. Currently, we have a severe shortage of nurses in the community. That's
Shortages.
pretty standard across.
I will get you an update on that.
I think I'd just like to always bring it up to remind you
Yeah.
that just in your daily workings that you can, you know,
Yeah.
cite an example of how it's not working and how, you know, it hasn't worked for a long time, and we're just
Yeah.
left on our own to solve the.
Oh, I appreciate that. And just to clarify, I'm still gonna ask about, childcare. That's been our position in the past, and we talked about the certified being a, but I'm gonna just double check to see if, on that, specific care situations. More current answers, let's say.
I think from my perspective and a lot of, maybe a new position would be helpful. I fully get that some people have the option to make that decision to
Mhm.
stay home, but a lot of people don't. And, you know, there's a lot of research out there that shows that you know, it's women that are really bearing the brunt of that, and COVID has really highlighted that. I think that, you know, we can all agree on that. So I think it would be really great to look at that. Thanks.
Any other questions for Mr. Zimmer? Any comments? Don't tell me we're going to make Mr. Zimmer a free man with an extra 10 minutes.
I'm even late. I was even late. And I apologize. I had a National Caucus meeting on the way up, and then we also had some excuse, but.
Well, we'll burn up another 10 minutes here.
Sure.
Is there going to be an election?
CN didn't even come up.
We could talk about the rail.
Yeah, please.
So I spoke to Mr. Barta, and Mr. Barta from Peak Renewables.
Yeah.
They're in consultations with the provincial government, with CN. Yeah. And I had asked if there was anything the municipality could do. They said thanks, but not right at the moment. There may come a time when we would ask that the municipality make some noise, but right now they're in negotiations, and their preference is that we stay quiet and until they need us to do something. But I would keep Mr. Bacharach on speed dial there just in case, because I mean I know he's the spokesperson for the NDP. Yeah. I'm not sure if
he's their transport critic, is he not?
He is.
Yeah.
And there was a lady from Saskatchewan, Kelly Block.
Yeah, Block. She's our critic.
Is she still the transportation critic? I'm not sure. But we may need their assistance in the future here.
Yeah. I know CN's an ongoing thing, as you know. Yeah. You know more than I do. Although we hear the train where I live in Fort St. John, I hear when it goes by. Twice in one day, and I was kind of happily surprised that it went twice, believe it or not. Maybe it was twice in 2 days. Anyway, talking, because normally it's one. Well, I don't know what was going on there, but always an issue.
May I go?
Yes, go ahead.
Are you hearing anything in Ottawa about the rail system? I mean, I hear a lot that down south, the rail, like CN is investing a lot of money, but are you hearing anything about that investment being kind of driven to other parts of Canada, or is it, what I'm seeing is it's mostly in the urban corridors, and that's where the investment seems to be centered?
I haven't heard of anything. I know that there's a study going on. I think you guys are doing that, aren't you?
Yes, the Resource Municipalities Coalition.
Yeah, the coalition, about what would cost to really bring it back up to speed. All I would say is I am eagerly waiting to see what that number is, and we need to go after it, because money left on the table and past in 2015, there was a lot of money left over that CN wasn't ready to spend because they didn't have their engineering ready to go to actually facilitate help, let's say, which I thought was just more than unacceptable. This is the time, those are the kind of times that we can quickly update an entire line with the kind of funds that were left on. So there's a lot of discussions, and I won't step into it because I know if it's sensitive, but CN's always an issue.
Fall election, spring election?
So before the budget, I would have said a spring election for sure. And then we saw, once the budget came in, there was a few poison pills for the NDP in there, no pharmacare, and there was some other things that weren't there, and I thought, okay, they're sort of pressuring the NDP to go after it. There was also some key announcements there. It's key one for me was the $500 for seniors, August 21st. There's a one-time increase for seniors, but it was what? For some. For something. I'm at least happy they got, because I mean seniors, frankly, a lot more, and so I was happy with that much, at least budget. But again, the key date there was August 21st. So you don't usually put an item in the budget after your election. So it just pointed to a fall election. NDP kept propping them up as they have. And that's when it's going to happen. Probably first couple of weeks there'll be the writ dropping, and then likely same here. October 20th, yeah, seriously. I'm a little older though, mine's 68, so. I won't tell you. You're probably in 80s or even, there you go. Sad.
Twins.
That's unusual.
Actually, October 20th was the date we all got elected to this office too.
Yeah, well,
So,
same with me. A few elections ago, it was the same.
huh.
It was a Monday. So anyway, that's probably what's happening there. So, I would just say what typically happens pre-election is money's thrown out. Or so any kind of projects, make sure they're shovel ready and do our best to do. Now, I don't get to see what the queue is like we used to when we were in government. If you have any projects, that you, especially infrastructure types, more than happy to write endorsement letters. Times that we should be, like your project at the airport, that's amazing.
Yep.
Because we've gotten apron money in the past, millions before, but to hear that the runway's getting done.
Yeah.
Good for you.
Yeah, $17 million. And we've been after it for years, Bob, because, we worry about our infrastructure deteriorating. And as you know, once you let your infrastructure deteriorate, then you start to lose things and you never get them back again.
It's that
and
spiral, right?
Yep, and we've talked about this as well with CN.
I thought we weren't going to talk about CN.
Yeah. But I mean, losing that line,
service and the
yeah,
lowering
if you lost that
expectations
line, how would you establish a forest industry here, or how would you get oil and gas going here? So it's important that we, that we keep what we've got and we improve them. And so this is a good step that we've got the airport paving going on. So
well, even that CN, we'll mention this, and doesn't have relevancy. That I was working with Mike Morris about an Alaska BC railway, and you were part of the conversation. So that's something I think should have been done. Have us connected into the southern network there. It just makes a whole bunch of. Alberta corridor went through when. So at least that's getting done. But I still see railway as a whole bunch of. Past its prime. Needs to be ramping up.
Yep.
Especially in a big province like ours. Yeah, absolutely. Ted Pickle's a friend, and port there, the promise is there and potential.
There's a lot of freight to be moved from the Pacific, through, particularly in the United States. I mean, 300 million people. That's a lot of freight that's got to be moved on a few railway lines, and it's, you're not going to be building any more rail lines across Canada and the United States. So these are getting to be, well-used routes.
Yeah. To make sense, just to catch makes a lot of sense.
Anyway, if there's no further questions for Mr. Zimmer, I'll ask for a motion to adjourn. Moved by Councillor Roper, seconded by Councillor Andrews. All those in favor? And we are adjourned.
Thank you.
Thank you, Bob.
Thanks for meeting.